In this video, I'm going to give you a quick walkthrough of how I like to prep my embroidery floss and use my Atom Heart Cross Stitch floss drops. Starting with our embroidery floss, and I'm using DMC 6-stranded floss here. On both the top and the bottom of the skein, you'll find the ends. I always like to start pulling from the bottom number side as I find it tangles a little bit less. And essentially, we are just going to completely unwind the skein. So just continue pulling the skein apart, removing any knots or tangles along the way. Now, just a heads up, this part of the video is slightly sped up, but this will go faster and faster with practice. So now that we have our skein unwound, we want to start a series of folding it in half. So I'm going to take those two cut ends of the skein, match them up together, and then repeat the process. And I like to do this a total of 4 times. So that was our first fold. And now I take those cut ends, match them up with the loop at the other end, and this will be our second of 4 folds. So I'm going to repeat twice more, again, making sure that your floss is tangle free. And you can also tell I keep it pretty taut throughout this process, as I do find that helps when we actually place it onto the floss drop. So now that we've completed those 4 folds, you'll have one end that is all loops and one end that is loops with those initial cut ends. So we're going to take our scissors and cut the loops only from the end that has those loose cut ends. And now it's ready to place on a floss drop. So from the front side of the floss drop, I will thread the loops through the hole, use my fingers to separate the loop, and then pull the rest of the threads through, creating a little knot on the front of the floss drop. So now when you're ready to stitch and need a strand of floss, you just take your needle, wiggle it under one of the strands from the top of the knot, and yes, I recommend only pulling one strand at a time, and then you pull it out. No need to undo the knot each time you need a strand. Based on the way I prepped my floss, I now have a strand double the length I need, which is perfect if you're stitching with 2 strands. You just fold that single strand in half, thread the needle, and now you're all set to stitch with 2 strands and use a loop start. And if you're not a fan of a loop start, you can always just snip that loop at the bottom with a pair of scissors. If you're only stitching with 1 strand of floss instead of 2, that single length of thread will be too long to stitch with. So I just snip it at the loop, thread my needle with one of the strands, and then I place the extra strand back on my floss drop in the oblong cutout, making for easy access. The next time I need a new strand of floss, I'll have that single strand prepped and ready to go. If you're stitching with 3 strands of floss, you'll need to remove 2 strands from your floss drop. Again, I like to remove them one at a time just to avoid any tangles. Then I'm going to line up both of the strands that I removed, fold them in half, and then I'm going to take my scissors and snip the loops at the end from where it's folded over. And this is going to give me 4 individual strands of floss. So I'll go ahead and remove one of the strands, thread my needle with the 3 strands that I need, and then I can place the excess strand back on the floss drop. Next time around, I only need to remove 1 strand and I have the third ready to add, knowing that everything is cut to the exact same length and ready to stitch with. All of my floss drops do come with stickers that you can use to write on and label your floss drops, or you can use permanent marker to label them. If you use permanent marker, the really nice thing is that you can use isopropyl alcohol to erase the ink anytime you need to switch out the colors or the symbols to relabel them. If you are using the stickers, they do stick really well, which is great, but you can remove them with a plastic scraper. And since they're hard plastic, you can also use a little bit of soap and water to remove any residue. To use your thread hearts as a bobbin, I like to start by bringing the floss around the back and then just start wrapping it around the heart, using that little indent at the top to nestle the threads. Once I have a good length of tail left, I'm going to hook it into the cutout at the bottom and then thread it through the floss ring hole. And now you can just leave the tail folded over along the back and then place it in your bobbin box just like that. Or what I like to do is take the tail and I just kind of tuck it under the threads on the back. I will admit this is not the prettiest, but it does keep everything really nice and contained. Now, when I store these in bobbin boxes, I do like to place them upside down. I find they just kind of sit easier that way. And you can also label them on the bottom corner if you're storing them upside down like this to make for easy identification in your bobbin box. Wrapping the thread bobbins is fairly similar. Again, I like to gather all of my threads together and then start by wrapping it around from the back. I do like to move it up and down as I'm wrapping just to kind of keep it as even as I can get it. And then I'll use those cutouts at the bottom to help secure all of those tails as I get to the end. Just like the hearts, you can then just fold the excess on the back and just place it in your bobbin box just like that. Or you can take that extra step to just tuck any of those ends underneath a loop on the back. And since these are a traditionally shaped bobbin, they will store just like any other bobbin when you place it in your storage box. You can also use floss drops for your pearl cotton. The top of the pearl cotton will be one big twist of loops, and on the bottom, you're going to find two different sections of loops here. Now, we want to start by finding the one that has this little knot here at the bottom, and we just want to cut it off. Now we want to gather up those two sections of loops on the bottom and cut them both clean. Remember, we are only cutting the loops on the bottom number side of the skein. We don't want to cut anything from the top. So now we're going to be left with a big section of loops on the top side and all of the cut ends on the bottom. At this stage, you can just slide the labels right off, and then we can thread the loop through the front of the floss drop, use our fingers to separate the top loop, and then pull the rest of the threads through, creating a little knot on the top. And I do recommend using thread hearts for pearl cotton as it just has the most amount of space for the threads compared to any of my other floss drops. Removing a single strand is super easy. Just wiggle your needle under a strand and pull it up. Since pearl cotton is non-divisible, I just pull that strand and don't do any doubling over or anything like that. It's already at the perfect starting length for the one strand, so I just thread my needle and I'm all set to go. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you love your Adam Hart cross stitch floss drops.